Hello, everyone. Welcome to this training video for presenters at the Parks Accessibility Conference in 2023. This video will explain to you how to make your video presentation more accessible when you record it for the conference. My name is Julie Nowak. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I will be giving this video presentation. I am a white person with shaggy brown hair that comes down to about my collar in the back. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt and I'm sitting in front of a white door on one side and a blue wall on the other. And I will now be sharing my screen. I'm recording this on Zoom and I'll share a slideshow presentation. Okay, so you should now be able to see my slideshow and my image has moved up to the top right corner of the video. So this is a title slide in the slideshow that has a black background and pale yellow text with a thin decorative horizontal line through the text. On the top of the green line, it says Parks Accessibility Conference 2023 presenter training video. And under the green line, it says with Julie Nowak, that's me, my pronouns, she or they. And it says I'm the founder of the Seasonal Body, which is the project I do my work through. And this slide format will show up again periodically throughout this slideshow. So whenever I reference title slide, I won't repeat the description. It's referring to the same format. This next slide has a different format. It's split down the middle, and on the left side, it's a yellow background with black text on it. And on the right is a black background with yellow text on it. So it's the reverse. And there's a short little decorative horizontal green line underneath on the right. And the title on the left says Access Statement. We value disability justice. This includes accessibility. So, not only are we talking about accessibility as a theme for this conference and as a topic for this video about how you can make your video accessible, but I'm also sharing some information here about what we're doing to make this video, this training video, more accessible for you to participate in. So, the first point on the right about this is that this video is being shared with you both as a YouTube video and as an MP3. So if you are watching on YouTube, either on your own or with a group, you can return to it later at any time. You can also pause it. YouTube has the captions you can turn on, and you can also change the speed. And the captions on YouTube, we've edited, they're human edited captions. And the MP3 is if listening to audio without the video streaming is more accessible to you. And the next point is that this slideshow is being shared with you so you can follow along. And there are two different versions being shared with different fonts because different fonts are accessible to different people. So this version has Arial font, which is a sans serif font, and the other version has what is called a serif font because it has the little dashes on the edges of the letters, and that will be like a Times New Roman font. Another note about the slides is that it's using high contrast, so it should be more clear. That's why it's either pale on dark or dark on pale for text versus background. And there are also hyperlinks throughout the slideshow. So this will be referencing other links that are also in the written guide that accompanies this video. But if you are accessing your copy of the slideshow, you can also click on links directly within the slideshow. So I'll actually show you. So I'll exit the full screen and I'm going to click here where it says documents, and you see it pulls up a link. And now it has brought up the link that was hyperlinked there, which is showing the Google Drive folder with all the resources we're sharing with you. By the time you get this link, there will probably be more things showing up as we're still creating resources at the time of recording. So now I will go back to, so that's how the hyperlinks work in the slideshow. And those links are also in the guide. So the next point, the documents link that was hyperlinked is that we're going to drop in that Google Drive folder shared with you many resources, including the presenter written guide, the MP3, the transcript for the video. We'll make sure you have access to the outline of the video and timestamps and other resources that we're sharing with you. Another point about accessibility is that during this presentation, I will be giving descriptions of visual content. So that includes describing the slides, and I've also described my own appearance. And I'm going to try to use clear verbal communication. So that includes speaking clearly and not too quickly. And I will try to use more simple language. And if I use something more complicated, like a jargony term, I will define it. And another point at the bottom on the left here, it says, take care of yourself, which is just a reminder that you don't have to watch this whole video in one setting. You can return to the YouTube video or MP3 later. If you're watching on your own, you can pause it. This next slide on the left says agenda, and on the right-hand side are some points about the outline of this presentation that I'll be going over with you. So the first is an introduction, which includes the access statement I just gave, the agenda that I'm going over now. I will have a slide about how to use this presentation and share some contact info and resources. We're then going to have a short grounding moment, which is optional to participate in. I'll share about who I am and give a land acknowledgement. I'll give a very brief overview of disability justice and accessibility. I will then go over the main part of the content of this presentation, which is the presenter guide overview about how to make your presentation more accessible. We'll then have a concluding short exercise for reflection called Head, Heart, Move, which is optional. And I'll finish with a conclusion and sharing contact info. And on the left, here's the breakdown of the main part of the presentation, which is the presenter guide overview. So first, I'll go over the guide introduction and then the 4 sections, which is accessibility tips for before the recording of a video. Then the second section is during the recording of a video. Third is after the recording of a video. And 4 is additional resources. This next slide on the left says how to use this presentation, whether for Zoom or other platforms. So I'm, for this most part, going to be referring to Zoom because it's a good platform for you to record your presentation on. But if you're using a different platform, just transfer the tips to that platform. So the points on the right about how you can use this is you can either watch this video alone or as a group at one of our drop-in sessions. You may be watching it there now. Throughout the presentation, there will be optional pauses for reflection and practice. You're welcome to share this presentation with others. You also have the option to use and alter the visual aids for this presentation. So you'll have access to the slides. You can use it if that's helpful. And I also want to say that this presentation is not exhaustive, which means I'm sharing a lot of information about accessibility, but I'm not sharing every single thing about accessibility out there. And if you would like to learn more, you can check out the resource list at the end of our document, which I will also talk about later in this presentation. This next slide says on the left, our contact info and resources. We welcome questions and feedback, whether about this presentation or the guide or anything about being a presenter. So you can contact us by email or phone. The email address is team@pac2023.ca. So that's TEAM @PAC 2023.ca. And the phone number is 416-597-3422, extension 3357. Again, that's 416-597-3422, extension 3357. And you can reach the conference team through that. The right is some points about some resources you can refer to throughout this presentation and that you have access to. So the main thing that we're going to be referencing is the written guide version of this presentation, and it's available to you as both a Google Doc, which is linked here in the presentation, and it's shared with you elsewhere, and it's also available as a Word document that I believe has been emailed to you. This slideshow can act as kind of a shorter version of the written guide, and there are links being shared all throughout to resources in the written guide, in the slides, in the Google Drive folder. And just a note about this slide with contact info, it will show up again later in this presentation. This next slide is a title slide and it says grounding moment. And we're now going to take a minute to feel calm in our bodies if it feels good to you to participate in this. So, this is an opportunity to calm our nervous systems, calm our bodies, calm our minds before we launch into the main part of the presentation to see if that helps us learn and absorb information better. And if you don't want to participate in this, if that doesn't feel good to you right now, you can just ignore this activity and do whatever feels good to you in this moment. But if it feels good to you to ground, I invite you to take 1 minute to do something that helps you feel calm and grounded. For some people, that might mean taking some deep breaths in with your eyes closed. For other people, it may mean keeping your eyes open and looking around the room, or using other senses like your sense of touch and touch the surfaces around you, or listening to what you hear. Maybe it means moving in your body, wiggling, or tapping your foot. So, whatever feels good to you, we're going to take 1 minute and then I will call us back in. Okay, I believe that's 1 minute. So let's come back into the digital space and we'll keep moving along in the slideshow. This next slide says, "Who am I?" I'm Julie Nowak. As I said, my pronouns are she, her, and they, them. On the left, I have my contact info. On the right are some points about me. So I'm a multiply disabled person, which means I have multiple types of disabilities. For my work, I'm an educator, an activist, and consultant. And so I've been hired by the conference team to help create some of these resources for you. I'm the founder of a project called The Seasonal Body, which focuses on disability justice, nature connection, body liberation, and food justice. I know those are some big words. I'm going to talk a bit about disability justice in a moment, but you can also learn more about these if you go to my website, which is linked here, which is seasonalbody.org. You can also find my various contact info and some resources I've created on my link tree, which is linktr.ee/seasonal body. If you want to follow me on social media, on Instagram, I'm at the seasonal body. And on Facebook and Twitter, I'm at seasonal body. There's no the in that. The next slide says, "This is stolen Indigenous land, a land acknowledgement and call to action. Support land back." And on the right are some points about this land acknowledgement that I'm going to be doing right now. So I live near Toronto, which is the Mohawk word that the name Toronto comes from. So the city Toronto in Canada. I specifically live in a suburb of Toronto called Mississauga, which is named after Mississaugas of the Credit, who are an Anishinaabe Indigenous people. And they are one of the original caretakers of this land that I live on. And they're who the treaties of this region were made with. Other Indigenous peoples who are the original caretakers of this land include other Anishinaabe people known as Anishinaabeg, as well as Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat people. And if you would like to learn about who the Indigenous people are on the land where you live, you can go to this website that's linked here and in the guide, native-land.ca. I've also linked here and in the guide a Google document created by someone else, it's anonymous, with many resources about Indigenous land and specifically the land back movement, which I've mentioned here. Hashtag land back is the social media handle for it, which is the idea of actively returning land back to Indigenous people. And I've linked here a specific land back project that I've donated to in my province of Ontario. It is known as 1492 Land Back Lane. and it is a Haudenosaunee land defense project beside the Six Nations Reserve. And you can go to their website to learn more and donate as well. So this next slide is a title slide and says Overview of Disability, Justice, and Accessibility. And this is just a quick overview. This next slide on the left says Disability Justice, or DJ for short. So, a few points about it on the right. So, disability justice is a movement that's dedicated to creating a less ableist and more fair world for disabled people. Ableism is the oppression of disabled people. So, with disability justice, we're trying to challenge ableism, which is also done by the disability rights movement. But I want to point out that these are different movements. In particular, the disability justice movement is trying to be intersectional, which means it's trying to think about other identities, not just disability, which is why it centers disabled BIPOC, who are Black, Indigenous people of color, as well as disabled people who are under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. And if you would like to learn more about disability justice, I've linked here and in the guide some resources from an organization called Sins Invalid, who have created a list of disability justice principles. This next slide says, what is accessibility? So I want us to all have a similar framework because different people have different ideas about what accessibility is. And so I first want to go over what it's not, because these are some things that people think it is, but I don't think it is. So the first is that accessibility is not a legalistic checklist of rules. So even though I'm going to be going over a lot of information here and it may seem like a checklist of rules, these are ideas and it's much more nuanced. So it's also not universal or perfectionistic. Universal would mean that it's applicable to everyone, and it's not. There's no one way to make something accessible. And it's not perfectionistic, meaning there's no perfect way to be accessible. And it's also not an either or binary. It's not one thing or the other. This next slide, which is the continuation of what is accessibility, is I want to share what my definition is of accessibility. So I define accessibility as providing a variety of participation options and equally valuing all of those options. And so it means not placing one version of participation over another. And this requires creativity and flexibility and love. It's a process, it's not a destination. So once we learn how to make things accessible, we still have to keep learning how to evolve. And it's an ongoing negotiation, which means sometimes we have to change how we're doing things. So sometimes people have conflicting access needs, or sometimes their access needs change. And finally, accessibility is a community effort. It's not something we can provide on our own as a single person. So we're not asking you to provide all the accessibility by yourself. We're here to help you with that. And we're also adding some accessibility things on our end as well. The next is a title slide that gives you the option to pause the video to reflect and practice. So if you're watching the video on your own or you're listening to the MP3, you can pause it here if you want to think about or take notes or practice anything we've been talking about. Otherwise, we will keep going. This next title slide says presenter training guides. This is the main part of the presentation. So on the left here, the title says Presenter Training Guide Overview. And as I go over this and all the sections, you can follow along with the written guide and the slides if you want, which are linked here as well as in the guide themselves. And here on the right are the different sections of the written guide that I will now be going over in this video presentation, which I also mentioned earlier. So first, I will be going over the guide introduction, then section 1, accessibility tips for before the recording of a video, then section 2, accessibility tips for during the recording of a video, and section 3, accessibility tips for after the recording of the video, and finally section 4, additional resources. And the main part of our time is going to be in section 1 for accessibility tips for before you record your video. So this slide, it says guide introduction, but it's actually the same information that I shared earlier, our contact info and links to the resources you have access to. This contact info is also shared in the written guide introduction. This next slide says guide introduction continued. So on the right are some points. So for your video presentation, we're asking you to pre-record it as a 15-minute video. And then we're asking that you submit it to us by June 9th, which you can do through our submission form, which is linked here. And I also mention later. And then if you're able to, when we play your video live during the conference from July 25th to 27th, we're going to have some live Q&A sessions. And so we're hoping that you can attend that to answer questions live after we play your video. This guide is sharing accessibility tips for your presentation. If you don't follow these guidelines, we might ask you to re-record, but we're not expecting perfection. That goes against disability justice principles. And you can also ask us for help. So please contact us if you need help with understanding these accessibility guidelines or with making your video or being a presenter in any way. So next is a title slide that says Guide Section 1, Accessibility Tips for Before the Recording of a Presentation. So for this section, it is divided up into 5 subsections, and these are numbered the same way in the guide so that you can follow along if you want. So we're going to have more slides after this slide that goes into the in more detail. So section 1.1, planning your presentation. Section 1.2, how to create a slideshow for your presentation, which is optional. Section 1.3, how to create an access statement. Section 1.4, some information about land acknowledgements, which is optional. And section 1.5, preparing to record your video. So this next slide is referring to that subsection 1.1, planning your presentation. So this is still within the guide section number 1. So tips for before recording your video. So the right are 6 points about planning your presentation. So the first is to plan ahead and to think about accessibility first. We don't want to make accessibility an afterthought because then it becomes more work to catch up. So let's think about it first. Number 2 is to read the guide and or to watch this training video or to listen to it. You also have the option to attend one of our drop-in sessions where we will be playing this video. Perhaps that's how you're seeing it right now. You also have the option to watch an example video presentation from last year's conference that's linked here and in the guide. Uh, surprise, it's my presentation, and it has a similar slideshow, so just in case there's any confusion, it is a different video. My hair probably looks different. And number 3 is when planning your presentation, share your access needs with us, so if you need help with making your video or attending the Q&A or any other aspect, let us know. Number 4 is to consider different learning styles when preparing your presentation. There are many different ways to structure a presentation, and we're not saying you have to do it one particular way. We're just saying consider that different people learn in different ways. Number 5, which is optional, is you can create a slideshow for your presentation, which I have a later slide on. And the last point, number 6, is to create an outline for your presentation, which our next slide is about. So, yes, this last point, number 6, creating a presentation outline. So, the points on the right are some things to include in your outline. So, an introduction of yourself, which includes your name and your pronouns, if you feel comfortable sharing them, as well as describing your appearance, which I'll share more on in a later slide. You can include an access statement, which I have a later slide on. You can include your agenda and outline. Something that's optional is sharing a land acknowledgement, which I'll talk about later. Of course, sharing the main content of your presentation, which is the main topic you're presenting on. And you can optionally share your contact info and resources. So next slide is subsection 1.2. You can optionally create a slideshow. So these are still tips for before you record. So on the right, I have some tips about how to make accessible graphics and slides. And there's a point on the left that says you can also use the sample slide templates we've created, which are linked here in the guide, and they're dropped in the shared Google folder. You can use those and adapt them. You can also optionally adapt this slideshow I'm using. It's less fancy. My skill set is not creating slideshows. It's a very basic one from a Google Slides template, but if it's helpful, you're welcome to. So on the right are some points about how to make clear graphics and slides. So the first is to have lots of blank space. So as you can see on this slide, well, I have several points with bullet points. It's not too many. I've limited how many bullet points I have, and there's still lots of spacing throughout it. The next is to have large text in a plain font with block letters. So some examples of good fonts are Arial, which I've used here, or Helvetica. And I want to acknowledge that for other people, other fonts are more accessible to them. So if that's true for you, please contact us and so we can figure out another option for you. And also please avoid all caps where you write all letters in capitals. The next point for clear graphics and slides is to use high color contrast. So, for example, having either dark text on a pale background, as I have here on the left, or the reverse, like I have on the right, which is pale text on a very dark background. And there are some apps you can use to tell you the specific ratio, which I've linked in the guide. But a quick way you can check the contrast is to look at your image or slides in grayscale or black and white, which you can do either by changing your screen settings or your filter in your program, or you can also just print it out, either print it out on paper or select to print to PDF, and you have the option to switch to black and white or grayscale. And when you do that, if you can still clearly read and see everything when it's in gray or black and white, that probably means the contrast is good. The next point is consider using images in your slideshow. They can help explain concepts, but make sure you limit them because they can be overwhelming and distracting. And we also want you to describe them, which can eat up your presentation time when you only have 15 minutes. The last point for graphics and slides is to have no flashing or strobing animations. This next slide is for subsection 1.3 for creating an access statement. This is still in the phase of before you record. So, an access statement, as I gave at the beginning of this video, is a way to inform the audience how you're making the presentation more accessible to them. So, on the right are some examples of things you could mention in an access statement. For example, you could share that you'll be describing visual content in your presentation, that you're going to be using clear verbal communication, that the slides have high color contrast. There are many things you could include in an access statement. Often things that are referenced are captions and ASL, which is American Sign Language interpretation. You don't have to mention those in your video because they will be provided by the conference team while your video is being played, and the hosts will mention it to the audience. This next slide is for section 1.4 about land acknowledgements, which is optional to include in your presentation. On the right, I have some points about some considerations for this, which is based on the information in the written guide. And as it says on the left, this section in the guide was reviewed by Aqua Nabi Wawasquane, who is an Anishinaabe knowledge keeper and artist. So thank you to them for reviewing this for us. So first of all, what is a land acknowledgement? Typically, it is the practice of naming the original indigenous people who cared for the land that we're on. The information I'm sharing is primarily for the context of Canada and the United States, which many indigenous people refer to as Turtle Island. If you live somewhere else in the world, then please learn from the indigenous people in your region. And wherever you are, please learn from specifically indigenous resources that are linked in the guide, and be very careful about asking Indigenous people to educate you, especially for free. So try to seek out resources that are already created and available. So many Indigenous people have shared that sometimes land acknowledgements are actually not helpful if they come across as performative. And performative is a word that means doing something because it makes you look like a good person. And it often comes across as insincere. And so we don't want to be doing land acknowledgements like that, where we just copy and paste a statement from somewhere else. We only wanna do a land acknowledgement if we have an emotional connection to it. If you don't have an emotional connection to it, then please don't include it in your presentation. Instead, we invite you to take some time to learn about this on your own, and maybe in the future, you will have a personal connection to it. And Indigenous people have pointed out that a land acknowledgement is just a very small way to show respect to them. And what's more important is to include action. So if you do share a land acknowledgement, it's important to not just acknowledge who the indigenous people are of that land, but also share action, either something that the audience can get involved in, such as a link to a resource where they can learn or donate. Or you can also share what actions you are taking in your own life, either as an individual or as an organization that you're representing for your presentation. This next slide is for section 1.5, preparing to record your video. And on the right are 5 points about this. So the first is to practice your presentation. You only have 15 minutes, so it's good to practice so you can stay under that, but also make sure you don't rush your words. Point number 2 is plan how you will be recording your video, such as on Zoom, which is a simple way to do it and how I'm framing this presentation, assuming you're using it on Zoom. But if you prefer to use a different program, you are welcome to. And if you need help with recording whatever platform you use, whether it's Zoom or something else, you can ask someone to help you, whether that's a friend or family member or caregiver, or you can ask us to help you as well. So contact us if you need help with recording. Number 3 is to set up your tech to have good sound and video quality, which my next slide will be about. Number 4 is to set up your Zoom account settings if you're using Zoom, which I have a later slide on. And number 5 is to do a tech rehearsal. So do a test recording before you move on to your official recording of the presentation. And for your test recording, you can follow the steps that I will lay out in the next section about doing the actual recording. So next slide is a follow-up to the point on the previous side. So point number 3, still under preparing to record your video. This is some information about setting up your tech to have good sound and video quality. Some points about that on the right is to try to have a good internet connection. In the guide, there are some tips about troubleshooting your Wi-Fi. Try to use your best microphone and camera that you have access to, but use whatever you have. Try to record in a quiet room so that there's not too much background noise. Try to have your face well lit and clearly seen on camera so that people can read your lips if they need to, or they can see your facial expressions. And also mute yourself when you aren't speaking, but that only applies if there are more than one people in your presentation. If you're recording by yourself, you don't have to mute yourself. Next is a follow-up to the point from a couple slides ago for still preparing to record your video is how to set up your Zoom account settings. So I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I have included some links to this in the written guide. So you can log in and check all your settings in your Zoom account. Pay special attention to the settings around recording. And within those settings, you may have the option to decide whether you're going to record locally onto where the file gets saved to your device, to your computer, or whether you do it virtually where it gets saved to the cloud and you download it later. I will say that the easier option is to record locally, and I'll share a bit more on that later. And also, cloud recording isn't available with all accounts. You have to check your Zoom settings to see if it's available for you. So I do recommend local recording, but local recording doesn't work on mobile devices. So that's something to consider. You have to use a desktop computer or laptop. So next is another title slide where you have the option to pause the video to reflect and practice. Because we've finished section 1 of the guide about what to do before you record. So if you want to pause and take some notes and think or practice some of the steps, you can do that. Otherwise, I'll keep going. So this title slide says Guide Section 2, Accessibility Tips for During the Recording of a Video Presentation. So this slide breaks down the 3 subsections of the guide that we're going to go over in more detail. Section 2.1 is the tech setup and recording steps. Section 2.2 is some tips for having accessible communication. And section 2.3 is some advice on language. So this next slide is for the first of those subsections, 2.1, tech setup and recording steps. And it mentions here that you can revert to the Zoom articles that are linked in the guide and are also linked here. For example, how to press record and stop and how to save the video file. But on the right here, I've broken down the main steps, which is first to start or join a Zoom meeting. If you're recording by yourself, you can just start it through your account. If you're recording with other people, it's a good idea to pre-schedule it. You can optionally change the Zoom layout so that refers to whether it's a speaker view or gallery view. There's more information about that on the guide. What I will say is that this is a lot simpler if you're recording locally onto your device rather than in the cloud, as I mentioned. Basically, if you're recording locally, whatever you see on your screen while you're recording is how it will be recorded. So, for example, when I was recording this at the start and it showed just my face, and then I switched to sharing my screen with the slideshow, I saw the same thing that is in the recording that you are seeing now. The next step is do not turn on the automatic captions that are an option with Zoom. And that's because the conference team will be adding professional captions later. The next is to do a tech check and a test recording right before you do your actual recording. So, test your audio visual content if you have any. You obviously don't have to have any, but if you do, test the volume and how that compares to your speaking voice if you're speaking verbally. And then once you've done your tests and you've checked the recording, you can start your actual recording for the presentation. And something you can optionally do while you're recording is you can pause and resume the recording if you need a break or something like that. You can also optionally share your screen if you're sharing a slideshow or something else. And at the end, you can stop the recording and save the video, which will either be locally onto your device or in the cloud. Usually, what will happen if you are recording locally on your device is that when you end the Zoom meeting, the video will be saved onto your device. You may have to select what folder it goes into and just pay attention to the pop ups. But as I said, there are more links to articles about this in the written guide. So, next is section 2.2 accessible communication. So, we're still under the main section 2 of the guide for what to do during the recording. So, for accessible communication, are some points about this on the right. The first is to follow the outline you created from the earlier section, which will help you have more clarity in your presentation. Next is to have clear verbal communication, which the next slide will be about. Number three is to provide descriptions of visual content, which I will explain in a later slide. And number four is to have trauma informed practices, and I will explain more about that in another slide as well. So, referring back to the points from the previous slide, this slide is about point number two clear verbal communication. So, the way we can do that is to speak slowly and clearly and to use plain language so that we're easier to understand and to define jargon. So, that means if we're using complicated terminology, we can define those for the audience. And if there's more than one person in the presentation, make sure you only speak one person at a time and mute yourself when you're not speaking. Next slide is the previous point number three descriptions of visual content. So, this includes describing your physical appearance and background, which I did at the beginning of this video, but I'll do it again now as an example. So, I'm a white person with dark brown hair that's shaggy and comes down to my collar. I'm wearing a dark blue t shirt and I'm sitting in front of a white door on one side and a blue wall on the other side. Very simple. You don't have to go into much detail. You can share whatever you feel comfortable sharing about yourself. And also describe the appearance of slides and any images if you are using them. And again, that can be brief, just cover the main points. And you don't have to describe the background of each slide each time if there's repetition. If more than one person is presenting in the same video, each person can say their name each time they start speaking and then indicate when they're done speaking. That can help for transitions. The next slide is the previous point, number four, for how to have trauma informed practices as part of accessible communication. Trauma informed means presenting in a way so that it's less likely to be upsetting to the audience. So, for example, it's important to give a warning before you talk about very sensitive topics. For example, if you're talking about violence, give a warning about that. Often these warnings are referred to as trigger warnings. I would consider instead calling it a content warning. It's a more broad term. Also, some people find the word triggering. So, a content warning is a better way to refer to it. And the second point is that if part of your presentation invites the audience to join in some way, such as a breathing exercise or meditation, or like I did earlier in this video, a grounding exercise, just let the audience know that it's optional and that there's no pressure to participate. And also give them a heads up about what to expect so that they can take care of themselves. Section 2.3, advice on language. So this is the last section of the larger section about what to do during the recording. So 2 points on the right, which I'll go over in more detail in the next slides. So the first is to avoid ableist language, and the second is some thoughts about disability terminology. So I'll go over those in more detail now. So first is when we're avoiding ableist language. So ableism is this big term to refer to the oppression of disabled people. And ableist language can contribute to that oppression of disabled people. So we want to avoid that language. And that includes slurs, which are insulting terms against disabled people, such as the R word. The R word, I don't want to say it out loud because it's such an insulting term, but you can Google it if you're not sure. We also want to avoid using disability as a metaphor, which is a bit trickier because we do this so much in our everyday lives. For example, if I say, "Oh, that dress is so crazy," I'm using crazy, which is about mental illness, as a metaphor to refer to the dress. So we don't want to be doing that. Or maybe I would say, "They were blind to ignorance," where I'm not literally talking about blindness as a disability, but I'm using it as a metaphor. So we want to not do that. And I've linked here and in the guide an article that has a list of ableist terms and alternatives. So this next slide is about the second point from the previous slide, disability terminology. So on the right here, I have some points to consider when we're actually referring to disability or disabled people. And my main point is the first one, which is to ask the community or individual you're referring to what language they prefer. We also want to avoid euphemisms, which are indirect terms. So we don't want to say terms like special needs or differently abled. We want to use the actual word of disability because it's not a bad word and we don't want to act like it's something bad we have to hide. We also want to avoid outdated language. So we don't want to say things like handicapped or cripple. At least in the English language, I know sometimes how they get translated into other languages is a bit different. But when we're speaking in English, we want to avoid the words handicapped or cripple. Though, a quick note that the term crip has been reclaimed by some disabled people, meaning it used to be a bad word, but some people now use it as a new word that they actually like, kind of like how the term queer has been reclaimed by some folks. Some people prefer what is referred to as identity first language. That's where you put the identity of the person first, in this case, disability. So I would say disabled person instead of person with a disability, which is the other option that some people prefer, which is person first language. So disabled person is identity first, or maybe like a blind person is also identity first. And person first language would be person with a disability or a person with chronic pain or a person with Down syndrome. And different groups of disabled people prefer different ones. You can probably tell that I prefer identity first language because I've been referring to myself and other people as a disabled person, but it's important to ask the community or individual you're referring to. And I've linked here and in the guide an article that talks about this difference. So we finished section 2 about what to do during the recording of the video. We now have another slide that says you can optionally pause the video to reflect and practice what you've been learning. Otherwise, we will keep going. So next is guide section number 3, which is a much shorter section. So don't worry, we don't have a lot left. And these are accessibility tips for after the recording of a video presentation. And so this slide has more about this section. And this section in the guide is broken down into 5 sections, but they're so short that I'm just keeping them all as one slide. So this is the only slide for section 3. So the points about this, after you're done recording your video presentation, um, the first point, 3.1, is to check the recording. Watch it back and see if on a technical level it's okay. And if there are issues and you need to record, just make sure you have time for that. Next is you can optionally edit your video recording. It's absolutely not required, but if you want to do that and you have the skill, it's up to you. Next is to send your recorded video and other materials, if you have them, to us by June 9th. And you could submit that through the document submission form, which is linked here and in the guide. If you have them ready before June 9th, that would be great. If not, that's okay. And other materials might be if you have a slideshow or other resources you used or referenced in your presentation that you want to share with us. But if you don't have other resources, don't worry. You can just share the video. So this next point is we're inviting you to attend a tech check leading up to the conference in the 2 weeks before. This is in preparation for the live Q&A session, so someone will be in touch with you about scheduling that. And the last point here is optionally you can help spread the word if you want to about the conference. For example, we've created some social media images that are linked here and in the guide that you can share. We just ask that you add image descriptions and alt text, which I've linked here some information about that, and it's also in the guide. So, guide section 4, additional resources. This is also a very short section, just this one slide. So, on the right here are the 5 sections that have much more information in the guide, but I'm just briefly going over the subheadings here so you know what to expect and you can refer to the guide for the actual resources themselves. First, section 4.1 of the resource section of the guide is I've linked some Zoom guides and tutorials that you can access. The next section, 4.2, is various resources about slides and images. So that includes some information about how to create accessible images in design. There are some links to some free contrast checker apps, which are optional to use because you can also do the black and white check I mentioned earlier. And there's also some information about how to write image descriptions and add alt text. Section 4.3 of the additional resources includes some information about land acknowledgements and other Indigenous resources. Section 4.4 has some disability justice resources. And the last section, 4.5, has some general online accessibility resources like other guides and tools. So that's the end of the sections of the guide. We're almost done the presentation now. So this is another title slide where it says you can optionally pause the video to reflect and practice. Otherwise, we'll keep going and we're actually about to do a reflection exercise together. So this is the second last slide. We now have an optional reflection activity if you would like to participate in it. It's called Head, Heart, Move. The traditional name for this is actually Head, Heart, Hands, but in trying to be more accessible and acknowledge that not everyone has hands or access to using their hands, we've changed it to move. So think of it as moving in any way that works for you, whether that's moving your hands or your feet or moving your wheelchair wheels or moving your eyes or moving your thoughts. And this exercise is a metaphor. So the head refers to what you have learned, the heart refers to what you feel, and the moving is referring to what you plan to do. So after hearing this whole presentation, I invite you to reflect on what's something you've learned, how do you feel right now, whether emotionally or in your body? And what's something you plan to do as a next step? You can take more time for this after the presentation if you want. I will give us 1 minute right now during the video for you to think or write, but you may need more time and you can do that. You can either pause and do that, or if you are watching with the group, you can do it later. So we'll take 1 minute now. Okay, that's the end of the minute. So let's all come back into the virtual space. And as I said, you can continue this later if you want. And this is the last slide. So it says conclusion, contact info, and resources. And this is actually just the same information from the previous side. So again, it says we welcome questions and feedback, whether about this video or our live sessions or the written guide or anything else about our resources, or if you have any questions about being a presenter, you can contact us by email or phone. So again, that email address is team@pac2023.ca. And the phone number is 416-597-3422, extension 3357. And again, I've linked here and referenced the resources you can refer to, which is the written guide, available both as a Google Doc and as a Word document. And you have access to this slideshow, as well as many other resources that are linked in the written guide, these slides, and the Google Drive folder. So that's the end of this video presentation. Thank you so much for participating. And I hope your preparations for the conference go well. And we're so grateful that you are one of our presenters. We really look forward to your presentation. Thanks so much.